Hello, and welcome to the last session of the day. And by the looks of the audience so far, everyone already head home, which I probably would too at 5:45 on a Friday. My name is Joe Guadagno. I am what we call a senior director at my organization in the U.S. And yes, that's right, I'm from the United States on the west of the states in lovely little town called Chandler, just outside of Phoenix, Arizona, where it's nice and warm all the time, about 10 or 15 degrees Celsius warmer than it is here right now, I think, if my math is correct. Anyway, here's my contact information if you want. There's virtually no slides to this outside of the intro and Q&A slides. You can reach out to me at the email just above or any one of the social medias. The slides are on GitHub if you need, or on my website. There's also an article that I'll share at the end that kind of gives one of the tips and tricks that in the 13 years I've been doing this talk, only 2 people have known, so I'll see how many people know. At the end, there'll be a giveaway with any questions I have to give away 2 JetBrains licenses to those that need it. So the agenda is just lots of debugging, and that's it, no more slides. So we are going to kind of walk through how a sort of intro to advanced debugging. We're going to kind of take our steps through that. Before we get started in that, I wanted to share the sample application, which, by the way, is super advanced. So if any of you are massively impressed with it, maybe you want to hire me. It has a person class, which has a first name, middle initial, last name, email, date of birth, and children. And then our program class is just going to iterate through that. Now, if you're looking at it, you're probably saying, I already see 1 or 2 or 3 different bugs. And good, you should, because there was an intent on that. We're going to kind of go through that. So before we go, I have the latest version of JetBrains Rider. Your experience may vary depending on what version you are. I think I'm on 2002.3. I'm not running the EAP, or .4 I updated last night, so fingers crossed everything works well. Your experience may vary. I try to use keyboard shortcuts whenever I can. I will call them out when I do, but if I don't, there's this handy little thing at the bottom that tells you the shortcut I'm using. But again, this is my settings, and your mileage may vary. So first thing I like to do is kind of walk through the 3 menus that are most common when you're debugging apps. The Views menu has the Run and Debug down here, and hopefully that font size is big enough for the back. Is that good for that 1 or 2 people in the back? Cool. If not, I'm going to zoom in. Because my real estate size or the font is so big, there's going to be a lot of scrolling. Normally, you won't have to scroll, so I apologize for that. So we're going to spend a lot of time with using Run and Debug, and then probably nothing else in this View menu. And then we'll spend time in the Build and Run. And one thing you notice is that the Run menu, things are disabled, like right here, the stop, the detach, the stop processes, all those are disabled because right now I'm not running or debugging the application anymore. But before we get started to actually debugging, there's a couple of settings that you should be aware of. So depending on your machine, I have Control-Alt-S. If you're on a Mac, it's Command or the window key and then the period. There's a couple of debug settings that you can look for, and they're all under this section of Build, Execute, and Deploy. Most of the ones that have to do with debugging are listed here in the debugger. Most of the stuff is okay to start with, and you usually don't need to change it. The one thing that I see people change quite often is this sort values alphabetically. And what will happen is when you're viewing something in one of the viewers, it's going to display the items based on how they're declared in the class. So if we look back at my class that I have here, person, it's going to display them first name, middle, last name, email, which is okay when you have 7 or 8 fields on a class, but if you start having more, you might want them alphabetically to do it. There's a tip that I'll show you a little bit later on how to always make sure you have the same things being displayed in your browser or in your debugger. Outside of that, mostly everything else is just tweaks to the debugging environment, except for the live edit and the symbol servers. Live edit just changes things when you're in a HTML app, you want to change it. How frequently do you want to update the browser and vice versa? Symbol servers, if you're one of the companies that uses their own symbol servers, I'm proud of you. I've never seen anyone actually use their own symbol servers. Symbol servers allow you to download the PDB files and stuff that are part of it. So I mentioned PDB files, and that's actually the important first step in debugging. So I'm going to go and view this folder in Windows Explorer or Mac Finder, depending on your guilty pleasures. Before we get into debugging, I want to actually talk about what debugging is a little bit. So I'm going to zoom in. When you open up your folder, you see a couple different files. There's bin, OBJ folders, the property files, which is in my solution, and then this particular case, my CS proj file for C# project, and then the person and program class. Tell me when you take a picture, because I like to hide. I did that one conference, and the photographer kept getting mad at me. He was changing positions, and I kept ducking. But then there are two other files, the bin and the OBJ files, or folders. The OBJ stands for objects. It's a throwback from the C++ days, where everything that the build engine does, it compiles into OBJs. Those OBJs then eventually become DLLs or EXEs. The bin directory is where we're going to spend a little bit more time in for a minute. There is a debug and release. These folders correspond to your build configurations, which we'll talk about in a minute. We're going to spend most of the time in the debug, but the folders themselves are the same with the exception of one thing, or actually two things. If you go in the debug folder, you see a couple different things. One of the newest features is the MS build will start putting folders based on the .NET SDK you're using. So here, this particular app I compiled with .NET 6 and .NET 7, so they're separate folders with what's needed there. Then you notice a couple other files. The actual executable is mastering debugging. It's basically a console app. Then there's mastering debugging exe.config. That's the configuration, so the app config, everything else in there. Then these other weird files that magically appeared. Well, they're there by the MS build, which actually compiles the project. The PDB stands for Portable Database. If you've ever done any ISS or ASP.NET development or even anything with the UI, when you get this nasty in ISS or ASP.NET, used to be the yellow screen of death. It says, hey, you messed up on file, blah, 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 and here's the call stack. It gets that data from the PDB file. So basically what happens is the compiler will generate the exe, then it'll generate the PDB file, and then there's something called vshost.exe. vshost.exe is actually what gets run on the machine, and that knows how to marry up the source code from the PDB with your actual executable that knows, based on this instruction set, this maps out to that line. And we'll see a little bit more of that as we get later, as we move on. And I said there was one difference between the debug and release, and that's this file. If you have your release configuration set correctly, this file shouldn't be part of it, because this kind of has a version of your source code in it, so you never want to deploy that. Lovely thing about doing this talk, by the way, in Prague is that JetBrains is based here, so there's a lot of JetBrains employees in the mix, so afterwards I'm going to get called out for things that I'm just making up or that are not true. So let's go and take a look at it. So when you first run an app, there's two different options. You can do run, which says execute the app, but just run it and don't attach the debugger. And then you do debug, which again runs that VS host with the PDB file, executes them together. You'll notice, at least in the older days with slower machines, the debug ran a little bit slower because essentially it has to start the process, load up the PDB file, and then run your application. But nowadays, they really don't make much of a difference. So if I run this app right now, I believe I get a failure with it. And now it's going to ask me which one do I want to run, because this is the first time I'm doing it. So I'm going to just say run the console, and then I'll get a console viewer, and everything works fine because I don't have the error in here. So let's see if I actually put an error in here. Actually, we'll do that afterwards. Let's start with the first round of debugging. Let's say we go out and we get a call. It's now Friday night at 17:56. Our boss is trying to run his weekly TPS report, and it's failing. What do? Normally you run back, or nowadays get online, try to get everything going, step through the code. So let's walk through how you step through that code. I'm going to do something called a breakpoint. So I put this little breakpoint here, and as I start looking, I get this red star, or a red circle with a plus in it. So I'm going to click on that. Now it goes to a solid circle. If I hover over it, it tells me that there is a breakpoint in program.cs on line 3. So now I'm able to debug the program. So I'm going to click Run and Debug, or Alt F5. If you don't like doing menus and you like keyboard shortcuts, there's Alt F5. But there's also 3 different variations of ways to run this outside of keyboard shortcuts. If you go to View, Appearance, there are 2 different toolbars. Now this changes, again, like I said, depending on your instance of JetBrains Rider, which versions are available. Toolbar Classic, which is literally last year's version, that's magically classic. And then there's Toolbar, which is this year's version. And then the main menu, which shows nothing. So look at Toolbar Classic. We have a lot more on here. The debugging part is pretty much everything from here to here. If we go to Appearance and hide the Classic, and go to Appearance and show the toolbar, this one's a little bit more geared towards the debugging. So this part here is my source control. So this is my TFS, or Git instance in this case, and then the ability to search anywhere. But what I really care about is this part right here, which is our debugging. So let me explain that a little bit to you. This first thing here, we have solution configurations. Now remember, when we looked at the Explorer, we saw a folder that said debug and release. That's because we have separate configurations. But if you're in a large enough shop, you might have a test environment, you might have a UAT environment, you might have a staging, you might have a integration environment. You can go and add your own environments here. I click Edit, and then I can add my own environment and do something like beta. That will give me a separate folder for them with a separate deployable that you can do with your CI/CD pipelines if need be, along with separate project configurations. So that gives me the ability to have different configuration settings. If I click OK, click OK, click OK again, I have the option of now choosing which one I do. So if I do Control-Shift-B and build again and view the Explorer, I should see that pop up again. So let's do Show in Explorer, go to my bin directory, and now my beta is there with all those same files. So that allows you to have different configurations, which is important if you're doing something where your settings are different. Let's say in test, you're connecting to a local API, where in beta, you're connecting to UAT.API. What have you. So that's important. The other thing you'll notice on the toolbar is that there's these different configurations. These are called run configurations. These give you a way to start up your application. For a console app, they don't make a lot of sense outside of if you want to add different command lines. Let's say you want to start your app with a -- help, or you want to start your app with a -- install. But you can choose edit configurations, then you get everything you would in a start run. project you want to start off with, the target framework, exe path, and so on. Now this is specific to the version or the type of app you're running. So like on a website, you'll have the URL that's here, you can launch it. I can still launch a URL if I want, if I'm gonna do like a self-hosting app, since this is a console. But all these options kind of tweak a little bit based on the type of the app. You can actually run something before. Let's say you have a script that you want to clean up your database. Every time you run this, you can do that too. And it supports pretty much anything in here, grunt tasks, gulp tasks, etc. And as we get towards the end, I'm going to show you an example that is a little bit more complex for debugging configurations. So like I said, we want to start debugging. So let's click on this little bug guy. Which looks like a bug. When I first saw it, I didn't know what it was. All it was like a green circle, and then you had to zoom in before I realized it was a bug. So now I'm here. Now I have this breakpoint. Now your color may vary. I purposely made mine yellow because it's really helpful on this screen to see what line I'm talking about. But you'll see a couple of other things. If I hover over here, I get this little orange arrow. It's kind of yellowish orange depending on your screen, that shows you where the current code is at. And then now I have this checkpoint by my breakpoint saying I'm hitting it, and then I can do whatever I want to. And that does not include opening Slack for some reason. Next thing I'm going to do, you'll see here that there are a couple of other icons. I'm going to skip those for now. I'm going to show them in a minute. But then I want to navigate through my code, because now I say, okay, I'm writing out console. I don't care about that line. Down here, you notice I have a couple of other options. So if you hover over them, you see I have a restart. This is going to rerun the program from where I am. So basically, stop this one, re-execute it. Then there's stop, and then there's resume. So restart, stop, and zoom. Then I have these others, which will come into play a little bit more. So let's go and do step over. Now the difference between step over, step into, and step out is step over will execute that line there. So in this case, on line 5, I'm calling a populate people method, which is below, and that's just going to return a list of 4 people, myself, my wife, my son, and my daughter. If I want to go in here and see how that list is populated, I can hit F11 or hit step into. Now it moves the code to that line. As you see, the little yellow indicator came here, and there's a line here. I can choose step over, and then when I look at this method, it's like, oh, everything looks good, we should be good to go. I can either continue to step over, or I can step out, like those 3 guys are doing. They're stepping out of room right now. I'm not calling you out or anything. You can choose step out, and then it moves out into back up the next line. So let's step over this, see the next one. Now I can go here and for each and start looping through those, but the next thing I want to show is that nice keyboard promoter that I have. If you're like me, I use the mouse a lot, and I'm trying to get used to the keyboard. There's this great plugin. I call it great, but it annoys me, kind of like my wife. It just nags me all the time to say, hey, press this keyboard shortcut whenever I do it. As you can see, since I last did the update, which was last night, I used this keyboard shortcut 31 times. It's also clever enough if you keep doing a key over and over again to remind you. So let's ignore that for a little bit. Not like I ignore my wife. Just don't tell her that. And I just clicked step into. Now you notice it stepped into a class that's not here. This class is actually the .NET source code for get enumerable, because I did step into. If you have this setting enabled to step into code that's not yours, it'll go and load those. It has a whole bunch of them already. I don't know if it's built in or if it goes out and comes back, but I can step into the .NET source code and see what's happening. I'm going to go step out, and then we're going to go through it. a little bit more. And okay, enough. I'm going to disable alert for that shortcut. And go through one more time, and then I get into the class, this class. Let's say for some reason, like those that probably have kids, my kids cause problems all the time. Let's say my kid's causing a problem in this app. Now, granted, I only have 2 kids, so there's only 4 items in this list, and I can go F10, 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 F10 4 times, as long as I don't mind those keyboard promoter messages. Let's say I want to stop only on Emily. That's the 4th one. So I'm going to click this plus button, and then when I get here, I'm going to right-click, and then when I right-click, I get some other options here, which are enabled, which I just did, suspend execution, which I just did. Those are by default enabled, and suspend execution. Then I get this condition item. This condition allows me to set a valid C# syntax for what I want to happen. So I can do when person, and I still get the IntelliSense, first name equals Emily, it should stop. If I want to see more options, I can click on more, and then let's zoom out of the screen because there's a lot more. You'll notice that there's literally a lot more here. This is the stuff about it, so it shows me the code, but it gives me a couple of other things that I can do. I can breakpoint a hit message, meaning in the log, in this particular case, the console, but if you're using anything that's iLogger, it can log to that. Can log the stack trace, or I can tell it to only happen if this, only break if it's less than a certain number of times this code was hit, or more than multiple of. So I can say breakpoint every 10 messages. Let's say I know that on the 11th message or the 11th time I hit a person, something happened. I can say stop at every 11 instead of me hitting F10, 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 F10. Can also do evaluate and log. So I can say print, which I think is the print, or I just type in the actual thing. Let's do person.fullname, and it's going to figure out what that full name is and then send it to the log. I can do remove once hit, meaning the second I get to this breakpoint, delete it. I don't care about it anymore. And then this is another feature that's actually quite cool. I can disable this breakpoint until another breakpoint happens, and I'll share with you how you do that in a little bit. Then there's also these other global breakpoints. So I can break when any exception happens, or I can break only on system out of range exceptions, or when any exception is thrown. So you can do a lot with this. Let's turn you off, and let's run this. And I'm going to actually restart the app. So click this button. That was code for I need to get a drink, so I can be quiet for a second. Let's restart the app. I got to make a note to disable this plugin during this talk. So you notice how it stopped on this hello world, and I really didn't want that. I know that the console.write line is awesome, and I don't need it, but there might be times where I need it. So you can actually right-click on it and choose enabled, unchecked, and that puts it at a red circle now, not a filled-in circle. That means that Rider is going to skip it. So if I restart my program, it should start off and eventually hit on here. Now, how do we know that it broke point on Emily without me having to go and look at it? To make you believe that I am not secretly doing stuff, let's go and view the console right here and see it wrote out Joseph, Deirdre, and Joseph, and if we look at the list, Joseph, Deirdre, Joseph. So I'm not lying for a change. Okay, so that's kind of cool. We figured out the problem. There's also other ways for us to get here. I kind of showed this where we can view the breakpoints. I can go and disable it. But let's say I realize what's wrong with Emily. I need to go back and change it. But I don't want to restart my program like I just did. You can actually take this arrow, drag it back up, and it will execute that line of code. Or once I hit F10 or resume, it'll restart the app from there. And I use the word restart. It's not really restarting. It's going to go back and re-execute those codes. And that's a big difference. Let's say in a populate people method, you are reading and writing stuff from the database. That's going to happen again. If this console.writeLine line, if this was doing any database transactions, it's going to redo those. It doesn't undo everything you did. It'll undo the memory, but any reads and writes to databases, any web services call, all those things would have still happened. It's not like a undo transaction in SQL. So that's something to remember. The other thing you can do is, let's say, well, let's rerun that so we can repopulate the array. Let's say I know this is all good. I don't want to rerun it again. What can I do? Well, I can go and drag this code down to here, but that's going to skip over it. That means I'm not going to write line console these 4 elements. I can right-click here or single-click here. It kind of shows at the end, and this is a bad line to do it. Let me go here. Here comes a couple of different characters here. So this one allows me to skip to here. That means I could jump over all the code and make this line the executing line. But that's basically the equivalent of me dragging this and going down here. The other thing, which was a lot fainter, is this, run to here. That's going to execute all the code to here. So if I do that, it runs, but it stopped at that breakpoint because I had a breakpoint here. Let's say I didn't want to do that breakpoint. There's 2 options I can do. One is I can take off the breakpoint or disable it. Or the other option, and this is only available on the context menu, or if I believe you hold a control key, but I can right-click here, and then there is a run to here nonstop. So this is like taking the express train to the airport, not doing all the local stops. I can do run here nonstop, and it just executed all that code. As you can see, I have Joseph, Deirdre, Joseph, and Emily again. Let's stop all that again and come back to the code. What was the other thing I want? Other thing is exceptions. Let's say I have code here that wants to print out a person. So I'm going to console writeLine. Let's do person 6, or people 6, sorry. People 6 dot full name. Now, if you've been paying attention, not just looking at my dashingly good looks, you'll notice that there are 4 people in here. So this array or list should be from 0 to 3. When I get to this line, it's going to fail. So let's go and click debug. Let's disable this breakpoint for a minute so it doesn't stop there. And then debug. Now, if I have everything configured correctly, and sometimes it's not configured correctly because I do this talk and I forget to unconfigure everything, I get this out of range exception, which was the exception that I mentioned before. I get to see details around it that says object out of range. I can click on this, create a breakpoint for me to create a breakpoint for this, and then I can figure out over time what I want to do. But there's also another setting. I can open up the Stack Explorer, which shows me everything that happens along the way. In this app, it's not too complicated, so I ran program main and then tried to do get item from this list. But if you had a longer app that maybe started up and then went off to get a database and then tried to run a calculation and then the TPS report, you can see kind of the history of where things go. You notice there's a little lightning bolt here, which kind of brings back up that list. There's also something else that I did not show, which I cannot find right now. But there's a way to ignore this exception going forward. So here you notice the little bug icon came up when I clicked on it. Once I do that, it gives me, where's the option I'm looking for? I don't know where it is, so I will find it through the menu. So there is an ability, if you go to, I think it's in the run, I can stop on exception, and then I can turn off or turn on any exceptions I want in the CLI. And then there is another one here, which menu changed. Oh, viewpoints and exceptions. So this is the one where I can go and say, I want you to ignore this. So anytime this one comes up, I am going to leave it. So I uncheck the only break on exceptions thrown from user code, meaning I don't care about it anymore and it's going to just be ignored. So that's helpful if there's an error you know, or if I have a try catch, which is what I want to do for this, to start wrapping it in a try catch here, or actually let's do it here. Another nice little feature is I can do this right here and then take the action list and I can surround it with a try catch block, and then I have the exception. I'm going to right line out Joe. No, let's keep this exe. This is the template telling me that I'm doing it. Live coding at its finest, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to do Joe messed up again, fire him, and then print out that. So now when an exception happens, it's going to do that, and then I can just automatically ignore those. I'm going to put a breakpoint here again because there's something else I want to show. When you're in debug mode, I don't know if you've caught this or not. When you are at a spot, so you notice here, and it's kind of faint, and I believe it's faint on purpose until I hover over it. But Rider is smart enough to kind of run the code ahead of time. So it's going to write out a person, but this person says Joseph J. Guadagno, date of birth, time, 17, number of children. And it really shouldn't be saying that because, like I said, I forgot to undo something. So pretend you didn't see that. And let's go and undo that secret code that's hidden for now that really wasn't hidden at all. So when I hit play again and come over here, now you see something that says person. And it's a person, so I can click down and then start seeing all the properties. Now here by default, they're all in alphabetical order because I believe I had that checked. And then I can navigate in and see all those properties. One of the really cool things with Rider for anything that's IEnumerable, let's say you're pulling in a list from a database and there's 2,000 fields in it, it's not going to show a list of 0 through 1999. It's going to page that list out by every 100. So it do 0 to 99, 100 to 199, etc. And I can hover and look at other things. So let's say here I see that, where is it? So my date of birth is correct, but my name is wrong. No one ever calls me Joseph except for my mother when I'm in trouble. So I want to change this. So I'm going to choose set value or F2 and then change it to Joe. If you notice, when I did that, it brought up IntelliSense because this is actually like I'm running first name equals to an object. So if I want to set it to a string, I just do that, hit enter, and then it magically changes. You notice the first name property went to yellow. That's because I changed the value, and as a result, this value is changed. So if I look at the person class, there's a full name property that basically builds out a string of first name, last name, or first name, middle initial, last name, and because I changed my first name field, that changed. And if I click person down here, I'll see that the person is Joe, and his full name is Joseph J. Guadagno. But that's not the only place to see that and do that. Down below here, so we're going to leave you up there for a while, but I'm going to expand this to give more room. Here we have something called the watch windows, and there's a couple different types of watch windows. If I go up to run and look at debugging options, I see quite a few things like everything I talked about before. Then there's a evaluate expression, quick evaluate expression, which I'll talk to. But then there's under tool windows, or I believe it used to be under tool windows. Anyway, I can see them now. I'm running debug. This will show me those same options. So this one shows me anything that any variable that the IDE knows about. So here, there's a children class, which is part of what I'm talking, or part of the object I'm talking to. The arguments, that was a variable that was declared because I'm writing a console app. And then people and the current person. And I can go and change these in here any way I want, like I was able to before. So let's say this is my wife calling me when I'm not in trouble. She calls me, oh, come on, let me edit it. She calls me Snuggie because she loves to cuddle with me. So I can change it here just like I could change it there, and then everything gets updated. You can also make changes here in the immediate window. So I can do person dot first name. I'm up on stage in front of everyone, or online in the world. I should probably be more professional, and change it back to Joseph. But you can also do any other C# type evaluations, like email dot contains the @ sign, and it returns true. So basically any C# code you can type, you can run in here, with the exception of lambdas and delegates, I believe. What else? Let's say I constantly want to know what the person's first name is, or full name. I want to make sure that my full name method is working. I can do something called add a watch. So I click right here, I can do add to watches, and now that item is always going to be there. And this is helpful if you have nested properties, or if you're working with complex objects, you can see whichever ones you want. You can also favorite things. So let's say I want to see that full name first. I can go and click here and flag the full name. That puts the full name to the top of the object, which is helpful. Now I get this person dot full name that shows instead of just the word person, instead of just the word person, and I can add in any that I want. Each one I add just basically does a two-string of those methods. That's really helpful, but it's only specific to the user. It'll be saved in between my debugging sessions, but if my colleague opens up his or her computer and starts debugging, they don't have that. So it's really helpful when you're in the scenarios of, it's Friday night at 18:25, I need to help my boss run his TPS reports, but I have to go catch a plane back home, I can find a way to give that solution off to someone else with those breakpoints and things. So there's a couple of things you can do for that. If we go to our settings here, actually, is it here? Nope, it's not here. If we go back to viewing our exceptions, there is a way, where is it? There is a way to save them off. And I said I just downloaded the new version, so I am probably missing the change, but I can save those breakpoints that I have for others to use. The downside of that, like I said, is it's only applicable to others. The same thing with like this full name and others. And that's where that secret hidden property came up, the debugger display attribute. So I'm going to stop or restart the app for a second. The debugger display attribute lets you annotate your code. Great. It had an error, which we did. It lets you annotate your code in a way that you can actually see what's happening. So if I click debug here, I should just remove that extra code. Now I can see that the person's full name, Joseph J. Guadagno, date of birth, 17, number of children, and I can scroll on forever because I can add whatever I want to it. So let's take a look at that. Let's comment out use so we don't get any other failures. This code lets you type anything you want into it. Basically, it'll do the string interpolation, like if you put the $sign and then the curly braces, and you get full IntelliSense with it. So I'm doing date of birth time, which makes no sense for most people. I can do date of birth equals, and then do date, or what I call it, I think I'll call it date of birth, data or birth date. What did I call you, Field? Date of birth, yeah. Dot, date, time, and I don't know why it's not giving me IntelliSense, but you should have IntelliSense for it, and then it will display the date of birth here. The cool thing about this particular field is if I come here and I see the person, now it's listing out my full person and the number of children. However, if I go down to my son, my wife, let's go here one more time. Now, come on, you're there. My wife, she should have a child too. Actually, she doesn't. Why is the full name shown? Oh, because I'm running full name. I want to go up here and see it. Come on, come on, come on. Step over. Step over. Now it's not showing, and I believe that is a mistake, because it's supposed to show the full thing, but what I was getting at is that the debugger display attribute is smart enough to work with or without exceptions. So here, I don't have a count because if we look at the program with my kids, the two of them have no children object, so it wasn't able to display the person because that string ended up causing an error, so it just skipped the writing of it. There's also another cool attribute that you can do called browser display. So let's go and stop this again. So you have this hidden field. Let's say you're working with a system, and in the US we have something called the Social Security number that's supposed to be private. It's unique to me and unique to each person. Or let's say it's a bank account number or something like that, something you don't want the engineers to typically see. There is something called debuggable or debugger browser that, yes, import that class. that tells me that I have a couple different options. So here I have never set as the default. I can do collapsed root hidden, meaning only hide it in the root, or never display it. So if I do this now, never, and I rerun my code, and I come back to the class, even if I go here and choose person, open it up, now the date of birth is not there. So it's a really cool way of hiding it, and I can't see it. I can still do person dot date of birth, at least I think I can, and it will show up. It also showed up here because the debugger display attribute does not honor that particular attribute. But it's a good way of hiding things. The reason why I like using the debugger display attribute is because in the event of this going on to another machine, this overrides it locally, and it's only on this machine. It's not on anyone else's machine, where the debugger display is part of the code. So one last thing I want to show is the debugger configurations. So let's say you have a little bit more complex app than this. I know that's really hard. This was very complex, but you have something like this that has an API project, a data project, a domain project, some logic in a web app. How many times have you gone and started your web app and ran it and then waited 35 minutes for IIS or Kestrel web server to start up, only to get a message like this that, oh, I ran the wrong project. How many times have you watched Joe on stage fail miserably in front of public? Let's go and tweet that. I wanted to run this one. Problem is I had that set up, so let's go and run the web app. And let's start our browser in this window so it doesn't switch windows. So what this app does, this web app actually calls an API behind the scenes, and if I go to /contacts, it will eventually fail out or its contact. And it's eventually going to time out because it's trying to contact the API, which is this: no connection could be made because the target actively refused it. Again, like my wife. Let's go back to the API. So what we typically do is we start this, and then we have to go here and start that. Well, Rider has this cool feature called run configurations. So if I choose edit configurations here, I can create what's called a compound configuration. So it's all the way at the bottom because no one ever uses it. Where'd it go? There it is. It's almost at the bottom. It's right up there with Docker. So I can click compound configuration, and I was like, start the whole app. And you can call this whatever you want. And then click on plus. I'm going to say, start the API, and then start the web app. And I can store it in the project file if I want, or it stores it just in Rider. And I click OK. Now here, I have the start the whole app, and if I hit debug, if you notice the console will start up, and it creates a debug window because it's starting the API, and the API started, and then it created another instance of the debugger. Now it starts up the web app. So now if I go back to that app and choose contact, fingers crossed, I got the API ports right. Oh, but I stopped Docker. My bad. So it's going to fail because now I'm going to get a SQL exception. But at least now I'm not failing the app, and eventually I'll get SQL unless I can start Docker fast enough for it to go. It's a race between Kestrel and Docker. Who's going to win? Kestrel won. Once Docker starts up, I can hit refresh, and you'll see that it works. There it goes. It's up. Now if I hit refresh, If I hit refresh, the API should be able to contact it. There we go. And it's up and running. So I was able to start both apps at once without any issues. And it's really helpful for a lot of other things. I can, here I can stop and restart any one of the apps. And this is kind of the new UI. I can pause or restart the web app, or I can pause and stop the web API. And this is helpful if I'm like building the API and the web app at the same time, or if I think the API is stable, I can just stop this and go back and I'll keep the API running. If you notice at the bottom, I didn't talk about this before, but now there's this debug window. If I ran one of them in run, there'd be a run window. But I have two different consoles now. One is of the API, which is running everything, and these were the errors I had before I restarted the database. If I run the contacts app, this is everything I was running. You see the errors that were in the database. They didn't fail because I don't have on break on any exceptions in the browser because they're in dev, and I want to see those failures. I think that was all I had. Let me make sure I covered everything that I wanted to. Yes, yes, yes. Got all those debugging options. Oh, one last thing I wanted to show. Let's say we're back in that scenario, and I'm going to stop all these for now. Let's say we're in that scenario again where something's failing on the boss's admin's machine. It's 5 o'clock on Friday, you're ready to go home. Now, as we all know, developers, when we write code, it always works on our machine, right? And it never works on someone else's machine. Well, at the end of the day, you can go, it's like, well, I can't figure it out on your machine. You're gonna have to pull in, back in my day, 17 floppy disks to install Visual Studio, or download it from the web and install it. If you didn't want to do that, or let's say you're running it locally and forgot to hit debug, you can actually attach to a process. So I click here and choose attach to a process. It's going to show me all the running processes on my machine that I can attach to. So this is the same way as me hitting start, run the app, and then attaching to it afterwards. So if I went back to this person, and there's actually a breakpoint right here. So if I run this, it's going to stop. It's waiting for me to press enter. I can choose run, attach to process, and then we'll see somewhere here. Where are you? Not that one, not that one. Here it is, this one. So this is the .NET Core process, which, by the way, that needs to change. They don't call it .NET Core anymore, FYI. I go and do that, and it's going to reattach that program. And since I have the code open, it should know it's ready to go and pop up on my machine. It's probably waiting for me to give permissions on another screen right now that I don't have open. But it allows me to get into that, and because it doesn't know the code where I am, it's going to just complain. So I'm going to hit stop. But it's a cool way for you to reattach, and if you had to attach to another machine, you can do attach to remote process and be able to attach the machine. That is all I had, and I lied, there were no more slides. There are actually 2 more slides. Let's pull those up. This is the slide that talks more detail about the debugger display attribute. If you're curious about it, I wrote a blog post about it a while ago. If not, I'll open it up to any questions. You can leave my contact information up on the screen if anyone has any questions. Or is everyone like, I'm ready to go get a beer and leave this place? There's a question in the back. Lovely young ladies walking to you very briskly. Take your time, we got all day.
What do you think that is the best advantage of JetBrains Rider compared to Visual Studio?
What do I think is the best feature of JetBrains Rider versus Visual Studio? Close your ears. Honestly, the real reason why I use Rider, there's 2 reasons for it. The first is it runs on both Windows and Mac, and absolutely nothing is different. Anything that's different is just because of the underlying OS. So like if there are certain things that .NET doesn't support on the Mac, Rider has nothing against that, but there's equal feature parity between both of them. That's the first thing. The second thing that I prefer Rider over Visual Studio, outside of Visual Studio, is older and slower. And it just looks like it has a problem. It was built over 15, 20 years. Rider's a little bit newer, so it can learn from the mistakes. But the cool thing about it is, I always like to say this, JetBrains Rider is like Visual Studio and JetBrains Rider had a baby. They came up with the Rider as their IDE. Those are the two things that I really like about it. I get all the power that I used to have in JetBrains Rider, but a lot faster because now it's integrated into the IDE. That and features come out a lot faster than Visual Studio. And was he on the team? Yes, what did I say? I said Rider is good. Oh, I meant Visual Studio takes time to deploy, and Rider comes out with features a lot faster. Sorry about that. It's when you go back and forth a lot. Any others? Cool. Well, thank you for coming. Thanks for having me. I had a great time. Any other questions, feel free to reach out to me at that contact information up there. If not, I'll be around for a couple minutes. Thank you all. Have a great day.